also working in boreal peatlands here in Finland. So this is my topic. Here are the papers I'm talking about. So I had experiments we created 2 papers out of those. So, but you can see them later on also. And the background for this work was the current situation in tropical peatlands. So the ongoing degradation, and we concentrated on these very heavily degraded open and burnt areas in the ex-megarise area in central Kalimantan, where the water table fluctuations are very high in comparison to intact peat swamp forest. And also, of course, all the vegetation, all the forest is clear cut and burned several times, and they are very hot places because there are these open areas, and yeah, the fires have caught the area several times. So there is a clear need for active restoration of these areas, since the natural revegetation doesn't happen much. So they are open if nothing is done. So and the exact objective of our work was to find native peat swamp species that would be suitable for reforestation in these type of areas. And we were concentrating on the species ecology, since it seems that there is quite little understanding of the early stages development of many of these species. And we also used some site preparation treatments and tested their effect. And all this was done through a big planting experiment in these burnt areas. We didn't perform any hydrological restoration, since that was not actually possible in our budget, but yeah, instead we chose 3 sites that were quite different in their water conditions. The selected treatments we had were fertilizing, mounding, and weeding, and this was not done for all the species we had. And we also monitored the environmental variables, which we thought that would have some effect on these species then. So quite a basic silvicultural type seedling experiment we had there. And the location, for many of you, this is very, I believe you know the ex-megarise area in central Kalimantan, close to Palangkaraya. And our companion was Simtrop inside University of Palangkaraya. And we conducted the research in 2 sites, mostly there in the Kalampangan zone. It's the number 2 there in this picture here. And then we had a very small experiment in a so-called natural laboratory zone close to or basically inside the Sebangau National Park. So these were our sites. And about the experimental designs, as I already mentioned, we had three blocks there in the Kalampangan area with differing water table levels. And we had 21 native species that were planted in plots. And we actually determined elevation in relation to the local water table level for each seedling. And yeah, for selected seedlings, we had these weeding, mounding, and fertilizing experiments. later on in the results about those. We had our own nursery in Kalampangan village. Simtrop and the local people took care of that. And the seed material was acquired from Sebangau forest. And all this happened between years 2011 and 2014, so it's quite a while ago. Here is some pictures from the planting to one of the areas. Yeah, and then we had frequent measurements for 1.5 years. We measured growth every 3 months and survival actually every month from every seedling. So we tried to monitor it very frequently because we were actually afraid that the area would burn. So we wanted to collect data as fast and as much as possible to get some data. Yeah. And the environmental variables we measured were water table and soil temperature, and some soil properties were also measured there. Yeah. And just very shortly about the data analysis for growth, we used linear mixed models with fixed variables related to water table and height of the seedling at planting, and more robust wet and dry season variables. That means the most wet time, 25% of the year that is most wet, and 25% of the year that's most dry. And then also the fertilizing, mounding and weeding for the selected species. And then something else about the model. We tested the effect of this block, but it was actually non-significant all the time. And then for survival, we used this Cox proportional hazard model that's suitable for linearly measured, or like a time series type of measurements. And there we had the same variables actually, yes. Then we had this smaller experiment in this natural laboratory by the Sebangau National Park. And there we planted seedlings in rows starting from inside forest and ending in rows that were in the open flood area. This is, and the elevation difference between the highest rows and the lowest rows was 1 meter. So we basically planted a row of seedlings after every 5 centimeters difference in elevation. So we wanted to see how much flooding these species tolerate. This is the Sebangau River flood zone. And there we had not enough seedlings for statistical purposes. So it was very small experiment indeed, but actually kind of interesting. Yeah. And as expected, almost 2 years after planting, 2014, or September, the fires caught our areas in Kalampangan and burned all the areas we had, all the experiments we had. Part of the seedlings survived that fire, especially in the most wet places. But then, you know, came 2015 and the areas burnt again. So that's how it happened. And after that, I haven't visited the area, but I believe that after 2015, there is not much anything left anymore. We did have fire prevention measures there and firefighting, but the area is very big, and actually our sample plots are about 5 kilometers off-road. So there is just a little track for motorbikes by the canal that these people can ride. So transporting all the fire hoses and generators or pumps and all these, it's very demanding. So these big areas are hard to firefight in if the conditions are bad. So I will not blame anyone, you know how hard it can be in the area. Okay, just some results. Here is just the water table changes in the Kalampangan zone. You can see that the changes are within maybe I would say 60-80 centimeters during the measurement period. And these are 3 different blocks where we had some waterloggers. Yeah, and this is like a basic table of the 21 species without any treatments. You can see their species that may be of some, I mostly know. There is the Jelutung somewhere in the middle, and Shorea balangeran somewhere. Yeah, they're down. And here are all the just how what has been the initial height and growth in 1 year and 1.5 years and 2 years time. The 2 years time means after the fire damage. So there you can see that some species or some individuals have survived after that. There is some at highest 24% survival. Yeah, after fire. Okay, but to the main results here. This is about the growth, and this is just 10 best species, and you can see that there were 2 that have clearly higher growth, or 3, and then some with very little growth at all. But these most successful species in this research were Shorea balangeran and Degraded rostrata, and also this Lithocarpus dasystratus was one that seemed to get faster, higher. Yeah. Survival, this means that how many of these are alive after a certain time point. There is the month in the, or like this 1 month differences here. And as you can, you can see this Shorea balangeran, it's very high survival all the time. It's more than 95% all the time. Similarly as this only legume we had, so this Adenanthera pavonina, it has also survived very well. And then this Degraded rostrata as 3rd one. And some words about the growth. So the water table parameter we had very minor effect because the changes are or there is so much fluctuation in the water table, so it wasn't a very good parameter to predict anything. Instead, these very robust wet and dry season parameters were much more useful, and we can kind of summarize that the dry season inhibited the growth more than the wet season. Both of them were problems for certain species, so that also very dry times or very wet times were limiting growth. So when it's not too wet or too dry, the species seem to be happiest at this seedling stage. Of course, we are talking about seedlings from 0 to 2 years age. And this seedling height at planting had a minor effect in growth, but when it was significant, the increase in planting height indicated reduced growth later, meaning that if you have too high seedlings, then they grow worse later. So there could be an optimum size for planting seedlings based on our data. This was something that was predicted already before by discussions with our partners there, but that you shouldn't use too big seedlings because they possibly will not grow well later on. But that was also somehow confirmed by our results. And the seedling age negative factor, it was just telling that in some cases it was obvious that the species were not surviving, or the growth was going down, so they were basically dying out, but they didn't during our experiment yet. And I don't know, these parameter tables are kind of hard to read for now, so maybe I skip it. And about the survival models, some general remarks also. The first line, that the results need to be considered against the overall survival of the species, means that for example, in Shorea balangeran, the survival was so good that there was very little events for the model. So generally you can't tell much about things that affect Shorea balangeran survival, because it was surviving so well. So we didn't have enough power in the model there. Again, the water table had minor significance, but these more robust dry and wet season parameters were more important. And wet season explained the mortality more than dry season. So there were several species that really suffer from high flooding. And then we had these actually about, I didn't mention, but about these 25 species we had, there were a couple of fruit tree species that are not proper peat swamp species. They're more like, because the locals wanted to test them, and I have to say that it was obvious almost from the start that these will not survive there well. But at least now we have a clear result that these species are not good for these conditions. Yeah. And about the seedling height at planting, it was positively correlated with survival. So this means that if you have higher seedlings, the survival is better. So it's a contradicting the result from the growth. So the growth may be suppressed by big seedlings at planting, but the survival can be better. So you have to balance the size of the seedlings so that they will survive, but it's not yet too big so that the growth will be reduced later. So that's a bit tricky thing there. Yeah. Okay, again, the parameter table, that is it would need a lot of time to go through that, so better go to these. So to the treatments we had for 5 different species, and I have gathered the results in this type of a simplified table. I hope you can see red and green. So the red color means that there is a negative effect on that species in that variable, and green means that there is a positive effect. So in Shorea balangeran, both the dry and wet season had negative effect, as well as the height at planting, and then there is no weeding, moderate weeding, and total weeding. No weeding means that all the ferns or whatever there was growing in the field were left there, so there was competition for the seedling quite a lot. And moderate weeding meant some 30 centimeters weeding around the plant every 3 months. And I think total weeding was such that we were cutting all the ferns from the area once a month. So they were basically all plain. This means here that as there is red color in all the species in Shorea, Alstonia, Dyra, and Capnosperma and Dacrodes, that this total weeding was beneficial. So taking all the ground vegetation off and repeatedly, it was beneficial for the growth for all the species. We did fertilizing only to 2 species, to the Shorea and Alstonia, and especially this Alstonia was benefiting from the fertilizing a lot. Then we had this mounding experiment. These were quite small, these type of a plastic bags almost. They were open from the bottom, filled with soil. The idea was to elevate the seedling from flooding, so that, and also partly from ground vegetation. So these were for about 30-40 centimeters high mounds. And for Alstonia, there was some help of those mounding, but for Shorea not. So, but if you go to the survival, then the scene changes. As you can see, I go back. Here is the, for example, if you look at the weeding lines, there are no weeding, moderate weeding, and total weeding. And now you have green things here in several species. Oh, sorry. So the survival is actually worse with total weeding in some species than with no weeding at all. So the total weeding may have maybe it creates too hot conditions for some species, even though it reduces the competition. So also the weeding is not exactly like a thing that you should do for all the species, as you can see. So the results are quite different between growth and survival. Yeah, but fertilizing was beneficial again for at least for Alstonia, and mounding was beneficial for survival in Shorea and Alstonia. So they were kind of a bit clearer treatments. Here for the species, so that in Shorea Balangeran, the growth suffers from drought and benefits from weeding, whereas the effect on survival is opposite. Yeah. And at least what we found, that these mounding and fertilizing effects were not so great that they would be actually needed. And it was overall the best species we had in this experiment. I think that it's a famous one already in the region of, yeah. And then this Alstonia pneumatophora, it seemed to tolerate the wet conditions very well, but clearly without fertilizing, it didn't seem to grow. So with just one fertilizing at planting, it seemed really that it could grow well after that. So maybe some help in the beginning would ease its use. And then we have the Gelutung Dyra polyphula, that's very much used, and we had quite bad survival and growth for it, and controversial results. But have to tell you that we also had problems with the seedlings. We had problems creating or growing good enough seedlings in the nursery. For that, we tried some cuttings at some point, and from the seeds, but in the end we used seedlings from seeds, and they were actually too small at planting. Big part of the seedlings were too small. So I wouldn't say that you should read these results about Gelutung very or you shouldn't take them too seriously. Yeah. And then there was this one Campnosperma species which wasn't growing too well, and weeding was reducing the survival. So possibly the air, it was too hot for it or something, that the shelter of the ground vegetation was helping it a little bit for survival. And in Degraded rostrata, both growth and survival were good, and only some heavy flooding seemed to decrease the survival. Here are some results from the Sebangau National Park natural laboratory experiments. And as I said, that we didn't have enough seedlings for statistical comparisons. And it was a very special place with very high water table fluctuations in the lowest areas. There the changes in water table within 1 year were more than 150 centimeters. And just to say shortly that most of the species didn't survive almost at all, but again, Shorea balangeran and Degraded rostrata were quite successful there also, even if they were underwater for a long time. So it was quite crazy to see those seedlings surviving that had been underwater, totally underwater for months. Okay, that's just some conclusions. I think I've almost used my time here. And is that we could increase some species specific information on the seedling stage environmental condition requirements with these studies. But of course, since the study was quite short time, we can't predict the future, how these would have grown later on. And my own feeling is that the nutrient deficiencies in this area, in this several time burnt and open area, may be the biggest limitation. And I've already talked about the seedling height at planting, how that needs consideration, because it has different effects on later growth and survival. So that has to be thought when seedlings are grown for bigger experiments or restoration programs. And yeah, I mentioned they're the best performing species, and that the treatments, if you want to do some treatments, they should be targeted properly for species, since in some cases they might not be increasing the success too much. So that you don't use your money for something that's not possibly very useful. Yeah. And here is one picture of a Alstonia pneumatophora after fertilizing, growing just in water, and it looks nice, but not a very big one yet. Yeah, and my background was really there in Helsinki, and some of you know Jyrki Jauhiainen and Harri Vasander, my supervisors from Helsinki University, who have worked in Kalimantan and other parts of tropical peatlands for at least 20 years. And Jyrki has been keeping a blog for years, Tropical Peatlands blog, that has basically all the work they've done and where I've also participated. And there is a lot of information on tropical peatlands still. So if you're interested, you can find more from there. I think that's it. Thank you. And if you have some questions, then please tell. I will stop sharing this now.
Okay, thank you, Maija. Thank you for detailed presentation of the results, which is, I think, very important if we are going to carry out restoration. Yeah. So we know that from the global survey of forest landscape restoration, there are so many failures also because of first one of the diversity or genetic diversity background of the seedling are unknown, yeah, and the second one also the sign is that they are keep repeating the planting in one place, yeah, and it creates when the failure for the large scale restoration, it can create so many disadvantage, yeah, in terms of the project delay or as well as cost. Yeah. So your information, I think we need more work, yeah, on investigating more species. As you mentioned that you have outlined some promising species, but they behave also differently. Yeah, they behave differently. The one is like for weeding, the other not, something like that. So. Thank you. I would like to. There is one question from Dr. Surya Tarigan in the chat box. If you can read as well, that the wet season explain the mortality or survival more than dry season. The wet season, yeah, because of the, I don't know, maybe flooding. Could it be because of the wet season duration was much longer than the dry season at that time? In general, which one is the biggest obstacle for species survival and growth? Is it drought or flooding? Drought or flooding? Yeah, which one?
This is definitely species dependent. Since there is, for example, the Alstonia and Jelutung, they both are almost water plants, and Shorea balangeran also, so that they don't seem to care about the flooding too much. But then these more several species that definitely can't tolerate long-term flooding. So it's very much species dependent. It's you can't generalize it too much. Yeah, that's what I think. But I have to say that the drought, the very dry, if it comes very dry, then that might be more or hard for small seedlings in the beginning, the very dry season. So that's why I think nobody is planting in the beginning of dry season, of course. So because it would kill everything. Yeah. But of course, if you plant in such time that the seedlings are also flooded all the time, then they will also be killed. So it's it's not easy task. No.
So I would like to ask you whether you want to still stay in this meeting, or if still staying, and then maybe there are later questions, but from the audience. But I would like to sum up a bit in bahasa Indonesia to the audience. Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita mendapatkan informasi dari Dr. Maija bahwa beberapa jenis tanaman yang setelah dilakukan pengujian penanaman, memang baru 1,5 tahun kalau tidak salah, tapi itu memberikan indikasi yang penting bahwa setiap tanaman itu punya ketergantungan masing-masing, ya. Jadi jangan disamaratakan, ya. Dari 10 jenis kemudian diambil terdapat 5 jenis juga yang sangat potensial. Saya kira Shorea balangeran adalah yang jawaranya gini, ya. Kemudian juga ada Dacryotes rostrata juga yang jawarannya di sini. Kemudian tadi disebutkan juga ada Alstonia, kemudian Diera. Yang Diera mungkin nanti aja didiskusikan karena hasilnya sangat kontroversial. Dan ini jenis-jenis tersebut mau tidak mau memang harus kita adakan secara banyak gitu ya Bapak Ibu sekalian ya. Karena mereka yang paling adaptif pada tahap-tahap awal penanaman, khususnya untuk menghadapi berbagai macam tadi Dr. Maija menyebutnya hazard ya, yang tidak menyenangkan bagi mereka. Seperti misalkan musim penghujan yang panjang atau musim kering ya. Kemudian juga ada perlakuan gulma ya. Gulma juga sebenarnya ada yang menguntungkan, ada yang tidak menguntungkan bagi masing-masing jenis tersebut ya. Jika gulmanya kita hilangkan, akan menjadi pada musim kering terutama akan menjadi faktor yang tidak menguntungkan bagi jenis-jenis tersebut ya. Kemudian juga pemberian pupuk, ada yang positif responnya, ada yang negatif responnya. Sehingga memang nanti dalam restorasi gambut ini saya kira para pakar juga sudah mengetahui ya, pemberian tugas kepada masing-masing seedling itu berbeda-beda gitu. Tapi ada beberapa seedling yang memang siap ditugaskan ya untuk artinya mereka berfungsi untuk restorasi seperti tadi Sorea Balangran ya, dengan persentase tumbuh yang sangat tinggi gitu kan. Dia bisa dideploy atau ditugaskan jika kita menganggap dia punya fungsi-fungsi untuk secara ekosistem ya. Dia bisa ditugaskan dahulu untuk bekerja merestorasi di awal sehingga terciptalah kondisi lingkungan mikro ya, sehingga jenis-jenis lain nanti ke belakang bisa masuk, dan ini kita pelajari saya kira dalam proses suksesi suatu ekosistem ya. Demikian mungkin summary ringkasan singkat dari saya untuk Dr. Maija.